Welcome back to season 2 of the SQSP Entrepreneur Show. My name is Omari Harriman, and I'm here with Will Myers, and we're going to get into his Squarespace story. We were just talking before I hit record about how this podcast has evolved and where it is now. I'm grateful for all of the guests who've been on the show before, and I'm grateful for everyone who's jumping on this season. I really plan on making this a platform for us to continue to tell our stories, share our insights, our perspectives, and the things that have allowed us to grow and thrive within this particular ecosystem. So, Will, thanks for being the first guest this season.
Yeah.
We spoke a couple months ago. We just kind of had a little chat.
So.
And so, yeah, man, I wanted to get you on again, this time officially on the show. And like I said, if you could bring us up to speed with who you are and what got you into the Squarespace ecosystem.
Sure. Well, I'm Will. I build stuff in Squarespace. To be honest, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it is I do. As with all entrepreneurs, we're always just trying to figure out, like, what is my job? What's my business? What do we do? Yeah. So I sell plugins, and I have a CSS course that I sell as well. But that got me into that. It really started trying to build websites. I think, as most people are, as they jump into Squarespace, they're asked by friends and family, "Hey, can you build us a website? Do you know how to do this? Do you know how to do that?" That's where it started for me. Jumped into it, loved it, build a couple in Wix first. I think everyone starts with Wix. And then you quickly kind of learn some of the limitations with that. Moved over to Squarespace after that, fell in love with the platform, but it was never really a formal thing. It was much more informal, just doing freelance work here and there. And then started a business about 2018, sort of formalized it with a good friend of mine. And we had been working together on various projects here and there. And she came to me and was like, "Hey, let's turn this into something. Let's turn this into a business." She's really good at selling. She had been using Squarespace before. We had worked on some projects before. And she said, let's turn this actually into a business. And I said, "Well, okay, but first I think we should date." And that was sort of my foray into it. And that both things worked out. The business worked, and we are married now. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that that's sort of the trajectory that you go. But it worked out well. And we started building websites. We both had this passion for online courses, and we really wanted to help people figure out how to learn in this new world, in this new environment. And obviously with an online course, you need a website. So we were building a lot of websites that sort of went with an online course. And then we also just did more marketing stuff for other companies. And eventually that just turned into, as that goes, as you start doing more and more websites, you start putting your name out there more. As sort of just your sphere of influence in your community grows around websites, you start getting asked to do more and more custom things that Squarespace doesn't have. And I remember it super vividly. It was like 3 a.m. at a co-working space. And I was building this website for a client. They wanted a different logo on one of the pages. The little site logo at the top left. They wanted a different logo up there. And I have no background in coding. I don't really know I didn't know how to code at the time. Then I just searched the internet, and I just Googled and Googled and Googled. And I finally figured it out, and it was super late. I was exhausted. But I remember feeling in that moment, I was like, this is magic. I just love this. This is like the coolest thing in the world. And that kind of set me on the trajectory of wanting to learn more about code and just really diving into it. Then it wasn't until about 2 years after that I started will-myers.com. How creative a name is that? Started that website, and it was mostly just around teaching the coding knowledge that I had learned over the last couple of years, specifically within Squarespace. As that grew, just sort of figured out that actually I could turn some of these bits of code into a little plugin. It's incredible sitting here talking with you, because like in those early days, I was on your website, like buying your plugins, being like, "Oh, this is cool." So it's fun to be here. And yeah, that's just kind of where I got to today,
Yeah,
started
yeah.
that plugin and got here.
Well, it's great hearing your story because my story was very similar.
Yeah,
Especially when it comes to like Googling stuff, and then not finding anything and then like stumbling on something that worked, and then becoming that for other people.
right.
It's great to see that. You mentioned your background wasn't in coding, so what was your background in?
Um, After college, I really wanted to join the military. That was kind of what I was going for. And then I got medically disqualified like a couple weeks before I was going to graduate because I dislocated a shoulder in a high school football game. Just I shouldn't have put that in the medical report as I was
Wow.
filing it out. But so that threw me into a loop. Like right before I graduated college, I was like, I don't know really what I'm going to do. My dad has been a diplomat, was a diplomat his whole life, and he was living in Haiti at the time. And he was like, well, there's jobs open down here in Haiti. So I went down, moved to Haiti for a year, tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and realized I wanted to go back to grad school. I had this after the military. I was like, you know what, maybe business. I want to get into business. I'd love to start a small business. So I thought maybe getting an MBA would be a good idea. So I
Yeah.
went to Auburn and got a degree in business and engineering, industrial engineering, not like software engineering.
Hmm.
And then again, came out of that being like, this isn't really what I don't want to go work for a big company doing industrial engineering. I don't want to work for a big four accounting firm. If I could even get a job, that's not even a guarantee. Um, and so I just started working for a couple of small businesses, and that's when I kind of fell into this world of doing all these there's this market of a lot of small business owners who don't really like jumping into the online things and internet stuff.
Yeah.
Jumped into that, and then yeah, so that's a long-winded way of saying my background is in business and engineering.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So like, were you like ROTC or something? Like, what were you like on like a military trajectory? Like,
It never really was a military trajectory. It was I think it was just my senior year of college.
yeah.
I just kind of realized like this I like the structure of it. I really liked knowing going from undergrad. I liked school. I liked the structure of school, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. I like the
Mm,
structure of the military where it's like, okay, you do this and then you go here and then you do this and then you go there.
mm,
I think I really love the structure of it. And I had grown up my entire life as with my dad being a diplomat, we'd
yeah.
moved around a lot. So I liked the travel aspect of it all. I liked being able to move around and go to different places. So I
Yeah.
think that's where it came from, but
Mm. Yeah.
maybe that's a
My
therapist.
undergrad was mechanical engineering, and I remember at between undergrad and grad school thinking maybe I should have done industrial. um, so hearing you say
Industrial
like,
is probably a bit easier. Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, that's still kind of you're looking at similar outcomes, right? And you get to
Yeah.
those outcomes and you're like, does this work for me anymore or not? But I think it's
Right.
interesting that you've now charted your own courses literally and in your
Right.
career, right? Because
Yeah.
at this point, like you say, like I rarely describe what I do because it requires like, well, this, that, and the third, or well, what are templates or what are explain.
Yeah. Oh,
Um, so it's always evolving, and then it's like, well, what do you describe what you do? Like what's next on this entrepreneurial track? But I think even the entrepreneurial track has its own kind of like there's like certain milestones and checkpoints where you're like, all right, now it's time for the first hire,
mhm.
or now it's time to I don't know, invest in some different marketing channels that
Yeah.
and so
Pivot into
on.
something
So
new. Right.
yeah, it's a fun game.
Right. It really is a game. And I think that's kind of the key in thinking about it is like there's not a set formula for it. It's truly a game. And if you can look at it like a game, it's like, there the component parts, there's marketing and there's sales, and then there's your product. And like those are the
Mhm.
three component parts of a business. And if you just look at those and just try and figure out how you're going to turn that into something that you love doing. I forget if I don't think we had hit record when we were talking about this earlier, but it's so important for your business to be focused around work that you love doing. It won't succeed unless you love it. You enjoy waking up every day and going into it.
Yeah.
I think you got to get there. And part of that, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, part of what they love is the game of figuring out how do these puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah.
And how you get there.
Yeah. I love that. I just lost my thought. It's coming back to me. The game. Right. So yeah, I see it like that, where it's like a real life role-playing game. All of business is like, I'm getting into real estate with my mom, and I'm quickly learning, oh, it's just another game that I have to, like, engage with people and create these different systems. You've got your sales, your marketing, and whatever it is that you're delivering. And that was something that I learned early on, where it's like, okay, you could be a solopreneur as long as you can put these things in place where you're, one, attracting customers, you're making that transaction and giving them whatever it is that they want. And if you could simplify it and then align yourself with whatever those activities need to be, then it could work really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have like a fun little life you've built for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, part of the game, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because you come from an engineering background as well. But it was hard for me getting started to realize that the rules of the game were kind of malleable. Like there weren't hard and set like rules of like, you have to do this, then you have to do that, then you go here. Like I said, coming from the military engineering sort of background, that's kind of what I wanted. And it took a while, and I'm still not there at all. Honestly, that's my wife's forte. She's much more out of the box thinker than I am. But how have you navigated that as you have grown your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never thought about it, but I think looking back subconsciously, the first years, I can't say how many, but it was a lot of years. I always felt susceptible to the step-by-step marketing here, and you get this result. And I think that's probably the reason why, is because my analytical mind is like, all right, what is the way, or what is the, what is the trick to this magic that's being like flashed in front of my face?
How can I make money in my sleep?
Yeah. So I went digging. And I do it now, by the way, but
exactly.
But it took many years. But I went digging for like what was going on behind all of these different like marketing wizardry that was in front of me.
Right.
And then I guess eventually I just got to the place of realizing, well, it really comes down to like who you are at the end of the day, in terms of what's going to work for you. It's important to understand how these things work, and then figure out, okay, well, how can I make it work for me? Right. So like,
right.
I know this is a platform and a format that works for me. That for me, it's pretty simple. It's like, I could hit record and we could chat and I could chop it up. I like chopping up media. I've done it for 20 years,
you're a musician too, right?
Yeah. And put it out. So, but if you ask me to like, sit down and write this, I'm like, oh man, it's, gonna take me forever. Right. Then even just doing videos like by myself, I'll record, re-record, like it's forever. But with this, it's on. Like if I drop a thought, we're gonna have to pick it back up. Like there's no, redoing this. So coming to that place of like, all right, like there's something I'm totally comfortable doing. I could do it pretty well, and I know what result I can get with it, and I know what I know its function within the business. And I think that's just after having tried a lot of things. Right. So all of the things that were marketed to me, I learned them and I tried them.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, it'll like, I reference inside my head, I reference this biblical story of David and Goliath a lot, where
Yeah.
David goes to fight Goliath, and the first thing they do is they put Saul's armor on him, which is, you know,
Way too
what
heavy.
you're supposed to have. You know, you're
Yeah.
supposed, if you're going to go to war, you got to wear these armor, you got to have this sword, etc. And David's coming from the field. He's not used to
Mm.
wearing this armor in field. He's used to doing things a little bit more organically, with stones and rocks or whatever. So um, similarly, like I tried on all the armor of online business marketing, you know, and then eventually I just had to take it off. Like, this is just not working for me.
That's so good. That's
And
so
that's where
good.
we're
That's a
at.
great analogy.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, you just tried a bunch of stuff. You sort of understand the core game, how it has to be played, and then you just
Yeah.
figured out how you want to play it, like which
Yeah.
pieces you want to do, and what works for you, and what you like doing, and what you have the capability to do. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I like that analogy. That's brilliant.
Thanks, man. So I want to shift gears real quick.
Yeah.
So I got to know your content and what you do through your CSS course,
Mhm.
because I feel like in the Squarespace realm of building out Squarespace websites, it's like a rite of passage, I think, to either be copy and paste in CSS or to
Oh
actually
yeah.
learn, enough to be proficient, right? Um,
Sure.
and so
Yeah.
I've always kind of, along the way, I've done little workshops here and there, and I've partnered with folks occasionally to teach CSS. And so when I saw you had a course on it too.
Mhm.
That's what prompted me to reach out. So what
Hmm.
have you learned from, engaging with students who are trying to learn this stuff? Like, what are the biggest takeaways that you would say are essential to getting a grasp of CSS in the Squarespace context?
Hmm. Um, one thing that just comes to mind immediately is getting comfortable with the web inspector. I mean, that it is that is the engine behind every single website, and it tells you, if you know how to read it, it answers
Mm-hmm.
every single question that you have. There is not a question that you'll run into in terms of CSS,
Yep.
but even like JavaScript and HTML stuff, there's not a question you'll run into that the web inspector can't answer. But it's daunting. It looks very confusing. It's just a whole bunch of code running around.
Yep.
But if you can master that, that's incredibly important. That
Yeah.
I would say honestly that's the number one thing. So and that's from moving from like the copy and paste code. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
copy and pasting to, okay, I'm going to try and jump in and try and understand this. I want to try and really get to know what's going on in this code.
Yeah.
And I would say that's like the biggest leap when you've decided you want to do that, you
Mm-hmm.
got to jump into the web inspector. That's where people get hung up.
Yeah. That's what I learned as well.
Yeah.
Once I got that, it was like,
Yeah.
all right, the figuring out became a lot easier. Um,
Right. Right. And another one is just trying to, and it's really hard, but understanding the limits of CSS and when you can't do anything more with CSS and you need to reach for JavaScript for something. That's it's a very confusing and ill-defined line.
mm-hmm.
It's not very clear what that is. But trying to understand that. And I think another place people get stuck is once they realize that, okay, CSS doesn't do that, so I need to learn JavaScript. Mentally, I think people just realize, okay, well, when is this going to end? Like, how many languages do I need to learn to be able to do what I want to do?
Yeah.
But it really is, JavaScript honestly is, it pretty much is the end, especially within Squarespace. Yeah, once you get JavaScript down, that is the third fundamental language of the internet. And once you've learned that, you'll be pretty good to go for a long time, and especially within Squarespace. I mean, there's not really much more you're going to need to do outside of that.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's great advice. Lately I've been thinking a lot about languages and just the metaphor of languages and
hmm,
how you need to learn them in order to do different functions.
yeah.
So, obviously digitally, you've got to learn the language of the web if you want to create and develop things online.
Sure.
But in business as well, there's like a language that you kind of have to learn in order to do business.
Right.
Different
Right.
types of business, different levels, so there's always this kind of language learning that has to happen in order to unlock new possibilities and opportunities in
Mhm.
your in your entrepreneurial world.
Right. Right. 100%. What are the languages that you speak in your business?
Man, I think I speak marketing. So like for
100%.
example, um I think about things like CPMs, what's the
Yeah.
cost per milli on these impressions across these different channels. That's, I'll call that marketing knees or whatever.
Yeah.
um the marketing language, in the past couple of years, the language of mergers and acquisition, or the language of acquisitions,
Nice.
on a smaller scale. So like, you go through certain processes there where, there's like a letter of intent, or you
Mhm.
know, um, you got to go through do this type of due diligence. And um, a lot of things that I remember in high school, like reading Rich Dad Poor Dad in high school. And
Yeah.
I remember him talking about, having a team and really understanding these basic financials. But at the time, I didn't have a context to like make sense of it. And
Right.
I was
Right.
I was a teenager, and it was just a different world. I didn't have like access to people who I could say, "Hey, I just read this thing in this book. What do you know about it?" Like I didn't quite have
Right.
that.
Right.
But now I've got enough of my own experience where like, I can understand the language of balance sheets and financial statements and saying, all right, is this a good
Yeah.
investment? Um,
Yeah.
the game, that part of the game of business of like uh trying to grow
Yeah.
and everything, definitely the
100%.
whole online business thing, because that's what I've been consumed with for the past 8 years, where
Yeah.
now I'm finally like zooming back out to the big picture,
Hmm.
um like the big life picture, the big business picture. Like, I've got
Yeah.
a brick and mortar space that I'm starting to like activate. And because of all of the stuff I've done online, I'm like, all right, I know what levers I can pull um locally, and using social media and the internet to like
Hmm.
turn this up. But I could do it on my own
Right.
accord. Like, and you mentioned like I do music, right? So I
Yeah.
I took this whole long detour to learn like these skills that I could then go back and apply to music. But then I still have to zoom out, and I'm like, all right, what's synonymous between what I'm doing here and what I'm doing musically? Like, where can I create this marriage? Um,
Hmm.
and uh, I think it's
Right.
funny like that you partnered with your partner, because like
We do too.
I was telling one of my mentees the other day, I'm like, yo, this with business, like you got to think about it like a marriage. Like you're committing to something for an indefinite amount of time, and it has to be come what will or come what may, no pun intended. Uh, um, like I'm gonna see this thing through because I'm married to it and I love it. And so like,
Yeah.
figuring out what you're willing to marry early kind of sets you up for whatever future benefits you have down the road, because you
Right. No, 100%. And then, and you also touched on something that I think a lot of like people don't talk about enough. But once you have your thing, once you've planted it and you've grown your business to a certain size, you can leverage that. And tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you were saying that you can leverage that into like the next thing and grow that a little bit, and then you can leverage that into real estate or something. I
yeah,
mean, there are ways. Right.
you learn your limits too quickly. Like like last year, I went on a little binge of, I'm going to buy these different little projects, or I'm going to start or grow these bunch of different little projects, right? Like
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
seedlings, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll buy a couple from the farm, or maybe I'll start a few of my own.
Yeah.
And I quickly learned over the course of 6 months or just a few months, like, all right, this is not going to work how I imagined. And so, like, a part of my journey has been reckoning with my imagination and my ego. So
Mm.
when my ego gets a hold of my imagination, it wants to like dominate and take over and like compete and like, be the best something, right?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
then and then it faces reality, and reality is like, bro, you can't do all of that. You're not supposed to, blah, blah, blah. But
Mm.
what it does though, it like you find your limit, and you learn at that limit. Like, I had to like push myself to be like, oh, I'm gonna do these extra things. And
Yeah.
then you get there and you're like, okay, now I at least know what it takes to get these extra things to the next level. um
Right.
which I
Right.
wouldn't have known that had my ego not been like, yo, go for it. um or
It's a
like,
balancing act. Yeah,
yeah.
it's total balancing act. You have to let your ego take over and say, yeah, of course, I'm a badass. I can do this. I'm going to do it right
Hmm.
now. And then you also got to come to grips with the reality that, one, just the physical reality of you don't have enough time in the day to do that. And then
Hmm.
second, you might not be the best at it. You might not ever be the best at it. And so you
Yeah.
got to reel it back a little bit. I mean, that I remember that was when we were starting our business. That was a big tension between my wife and I, is that
Hmm.
she would go out and sell something that I was like, I have no idea how to do this. And the expectation would be me to build it.
Yeah.
But of course, if she hadn't have done that, I would not be in this position I'm in today.
Yeah.
So it's a total balancing act, and you got to have the self-awareness to know, okay, I've taken this a step too far. Now I
Hmm.
need to reel it back again.
Yeah.
Or now I'm not being adventurous enough, and I gotta have a little more self-confidence and just jump out
Right.
there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like how you describe that. And what you experienced with your wife, I feel like I experienced that within myself, where
Mm,
I would take on things that I'm like, I didn't know exactly how I would get this done. But I felt like as long as I could do 80%, the other 20% I could figure out. Um,
yeah.
I know what I enjoy and love to do, and it's not as much as I like to imagine I can do. Right.
Right.
So like, I think that was
100%.
my point, is that like a lot of the things I like to imagine I can do, I don't enjoy doing them. But
Right.
I have a great deal of
You like
joy.
the
Like,
idea of yourself doing it.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I can
Yeah.
envision, I can have visions of things coming together and whatever.
Mhm.
But now I'm just more like, okay, I could leverage the fact that I'm a relationship builder, and uh that's
Mm.
just had that's just a part of my like natural way of being, where I enter a new space. Okay, I have to build relationships in order to function.
Right.
Um,
Right.
which is lesson all by itself. But yeah, man.
That's a great piece of advice. I think that's every entrepreneur needs to hear that.
You
That's
hear
good,
that?
man. Yeah. Right, right. Um, well, I have some questions for you. I wrote down a
Oh,
couple
go for
questions
it.
because I
Oh,
I am prepared.
all right, let's
Um,
go.
so over the last month, what has been consuming the majority of your imagination? Like your head. You were just saying
Yeah.
imagination. What's been consuming the majority of that?
Music. So yeah, so last December, which is now 4 months ago around, I started putting out music, which I hadn't done in maybe at least 8 years, at least since right before my son was born. And
Mm,
initially it was like, it felt great because I was just doing it for myself and I was doing it for him. And I felt like satisfied. I was like, all right, finally I've kind of crossed this chasm, and I'm happy. and
right.
then And then after the happiness came, all right, then my son is like, hey, we got to get more people to hear this. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. Now I gotta
Oh,
get back into this different kind of mindset of like, all right, I have to like come out of my cocoon, and now I have to
mhm.
like connect with people, right? Um,
Right.
After a long period of just connecting with myself,
Mhm.
and not necessarily having to connect on that type of a plane. So to answer your
Very
question,
vulnerable.
the last month
Yeah.
has been like, okay, well, how do I now strategize around this? How do I take what I've learned? How do I take the time that I have? Um, and how do I create this, this new world that's my world, with the music? So it's been fun, because it's calling out of me, you know,
Yeah.
new skills or dormant skills.
Right.
Um, and So it's been good because now I've put some structure in place where I've got these 2 days out of the week where I'm in the studio and I'm doing these
Wow.
these podcasts and I'm doing support or whatever I need to do, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the other days I don't have to worry about that. I can just worry about the family stuff, like whether
Mhm.
taking my son to his baseball practice or whatever
Yeah.
family things need to get addressed. And it's given me like just like now I'm good. Like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
All I needed was just work hours.
Wait, so you're working 2 days a week and the rest you can sort of dedicate to family and creative stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
here's the
that's
thing though.
amazing. Well
The
done.
here's the thing. Like I deconstructed everything, right? So like
Yeah.
went from structured everything to like no structure at all. Like just
Yeah.
um
Total
like I'd
loose.
started homeschooling my son and then I just let go of all of those. I let go of like all of the structures. And so
Mhm.
now I'm at like rebuilding, okay, what structures work for me? And what can I put in place that's not going to drain me or whatever like that. So
Right.
I've been operating for a long time, just like free form, where it's like, uh, a week might go by and I haven't like checked in on something that I should check in on. But that
Yeah.
thing only needs to be 2 minutes, right? So I have
Right.
like this week buildup of anxiety around something that takes 2 minutes to address, right?
Oh,
So
preaching to the choir here.
that kept happening where I'm
Yeah.
like, I've got this anxiety build up, and then I'm like, man, that took you 5 minutes. You could have just done that like a week
A week
ago and
ago.
it would have
Right.
been nothing, right? So it's like
Right.
adjusting to where there was once always chronic pressure and like ongoing
Hmm.
demands to like
Hmm.
peeking around the corner and it's like, okay, maybe there's not like a threat. There's no longer this threat of
Right.
like, a demand not being met and then me like suffering the consequences, right?
Right.
There's a
Right.
little, I mean, I'm still
That-
sensitive to demands, but I'm like sensitive in a way that's kind of like, don't demand anything of me,
yeah.
right?
Please
It's
don't.
like
Right.
I don't want to drop
100%.
anything. But
Yeah.
now I'm putting structures in place so I can essentially do what I've always already done,
Hmm.
and do what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but like with the peace of mind, right? That like I'm doing it with peace of mind. Like I'm not,
Right.
and that's kind of like that's my centerpiece. Like as long as there's peace of mind, everything will revolve and rotate and
That's
emanate
good.
from that with harmony
Yeah.
and good harmonics in
Yeah.
our
I
world.
found that very helpful. Finding like one word or one phrase that you can always sort of jump back to, and peace of mind. That's a great one. I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, that's good. That sounds like you're dealing with the or you're, I don't know, solving the problem of PTSD for entrepreneurs, where it's like you're always jittery and you can't like really sleep because you're always thinking about like the email you forgot to send the client, or like, oh, this design isn't mobile responsive, or yeah,
Yeah.
it's a struggle. Like I'm glad it sounds like you're dealing with it in an incredibly healthy way. And that's good.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah, I guess time will tell.
anytime
Time
you
will
deal
tell.
with PTSD, it's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, that's good. That's cool, man. I'm glad to hear that you're in a place where you can spend 2 days a week on that and spend the other time sort of like building these other things and
Yeah,
focusing on family and doing all that. It takes 8 years to get there, but there
man.
it is.
If you had told my younger self that, I would have like opted for something a lot faster.
Oh, I know. I think that's the biggest that's a big hurdle a lot of people have to get over is they want to start a business because they want the freedom, which
Immediately.
100% totally agree. But you have an utter lack of freedom for the first
Mm-hmm.
few years. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. It's very hard. You can get there and you really can't get there working for someone else. You really like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you're getting a paycheck from someone else, you can't get there. You do get a steady paycheck. You don't have those as many sleepless nights thinking about stuff. Maybe you do. I don't know the person's job.
Yeah.
But you have less responsibility, but owning a business it's the only way to ultimately get there.
Yeah.
I believe.
No, I agree.
But
What else you got, man?
I got one more that's sort of a toss out. I'm sure you've answered this a number of times. Like what is one piece of advice? So someone's listening to your podcast that is new to Squarespace web design. Like right now in the place Squarespace is, what piece of advice would you give them?
Huh. Well, so if I were starting out right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there might be like a trifecta of things. One is to like immerse yourself in the platform. So
Mm.
learn all of the nooks and crannies, and figure out what the limitations are,
Yeah.
because that's where the opportunities will always be. Um,
Right.
and so you're essentially a pioneer for your clients or your customers or whatever with the platform. So the first thing is getting into it and knowing it as much as you possibly can. And then the second thing would be, as that pioneer, you got to leave some breadcrumbs and you got to leave some tools or whatever for your clients and your customers coming behind you, um, because then that kind of sets you up to go even further, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can kind of figure out your way from there. But I guess it's not really a trifecta, it's a two-factor.
Yeah. There
Learning
we
the
go.
platform and share what you learn. That's what my whole thing has been built on. I think that's what your thing has been built on.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who I speak to, it's kind of like, you go as far as you can. You run into some problems, you solve them, and you share your solutions.
Right.
The Facebook
Right.
groups, all the communities that have evolved out of this one web platform are pretty much built on that premise of like, hey, you figure out something, share it with the rest of us because we're trying to figure it out too.
Right. Exactly. And guaranteed someone else has the exact same question or ran into the exact same issue that you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I
That's
guess
good.
maybe a third piece of advice would be like,
Here's the
all right,
trifecta.
because the third piece would be kind of like, all right, but Will's already done it.
Mm.
Omari's already done this, that, and the third. Like, what is there for me or whatever? And I remember 2014 when I was getting started, um, someone was selling templates and plugins and tutorials and like the whole shebang. And I remember thinking, well, all right, so that's already done. So let me go, go build these websites or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But years later, I ran into my own problems. And so like, it's not necessarily like caring about what other people have solved. It's like, all right, what problems are relevant to you that you care about that haven't been solved?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're pushing on your own path, you're going to find those things, and those things are going to be unique to you. and that uniqueness is your positioning, right? Versus thinking
Right.
like, I can't, all this stuff has already been done. Like, no, there's a lot of stuff there's stuff that I think about that I know needs to happen, but I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
I just
There's
gotta,
100%. There's like 1,000 things out there. And even the things that are already built, like you
yeah.
said, it will not serve every use case. There's no way to code something that serves every use case.
Mm-hmm.
So try the ones that are out there. And if it doesn't, build your own. I mean, that's the beauty of the internet. It's like this empty canvas that you can do whatever you want to it. Like every piece of art's different. It's its own. I love that. That's good. And you pulled it in with the trifecta there.
Yeah, I got back to it. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Well, that's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the role reversal on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fun for me.
I'm sure this is the beginning of a new future for you as a host. Is there anything you wanna say? Any final thing you want to share?
Just not really. I just thank you for having me on and enjoyed our conversation. Always good talking to you, and glad to hear about all the other stuff you're doing. Keep giving advice to more entrepreneurs out there. They need it. They need it.
That's why we're doing the show, man. So thanks again for coming on. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Squarespace Entrepreneur Podcast.
Love
Peace.
it.